Hello, and welcome to my presentation on Rethinking Social Skills Programs by Centering Autistic Communication and Friendship. My name is Peter Jung. I've been working with autistic kids for about 11 years. I'm autistic myself, and I have an extensive amount of experience working around social skills programs and various programs that really are trying to help autistic kids find friendship, find companionship, and learn how to get along with each other and things like that. So I've been doing that for quite a long time, and one of the biggest revelations I've had over the years is that there is a significant difference between neurotypical social skills and autistic social skills, and I think both are really important. And autistic people, they're built different, and their friendships are built different. So that needs to be really honored in any sort of social skills program. So jumping right into it. So I'm gonna kind of try to keep it under 45 minutes. This is a recorded thing. I occasionally run into a stuttering program, or problem, so wanted to kind of have a pre-recorded thing, pre-recorded video of the presentation, just to ensure that that doesn't happen. Although hopefully there will be enough time at the end for me to take some Q&A. So really looking forward to that. Anyways, gonna be talking about my experience growing up autistic and finding friends and figuring that whole thing out for myself. And then how to use gaming to develop social skills. A lot of autistic people are really into gaming, and it is a really natural way to develop some amazing social skills. And then how to develop autistic-centered social skills, which is, a different thing altogether, but once you kind of start thinking about it, it's not that difficult. So jumping right in. So I'm Peter Young, and I am autistic. I found out just last year. Had been running with a ADHD diagnosis since around first grade, back when that was super popular for anyone who couldn't really focus. Turns out I needed glasses, and sensory issues in the classroom made it kind of difficult for me to focus on anything. But for years and years and years, due to some kind of black and white and really rigid thinking, despite me working really well with autistic kids and just really vibing well with them, being on their bandwidth, really loving trains and all these kind of like hyper geeky, super stereotypical autistic interests, it never occurred to me that I might be autistic until a friend of mine who is a diagnostician for autism said, please get assessed. So I did, and it turns out I'm autistic. Um, I've got about 11 years of using tabletop and video games in various therapeutic contexts, largely with neurodiverse clients. I say therapeutics, it's, therapy or therapy adjacent, talking kind of stereotypical social skills groups, or things like foster care groups and things like that. Um, my academic history is I have a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in education and curriculum design. Both of them are from the University of Washington. And I'm really, really passionate about creating a kinder world for autistic people. And I think a big part of that is creating a world that is less lonely for them. A lot of autistic people really struggle to make friends, to keep friends. They don't see themselves as friends on TV. They don't have a lot of social activities that are really engineered for them. And I think that, having friends is one of the biggest indicators for success as an adult, because that creates a safety net that reduces feelings of isolation and loneliness. So being able to have friends and have friendships that are really set up for success in the long term, I think is a really critical piece um, for developing success and helping autistic kids grow up happy. So uh, one question I get when talking about, let's talk about developing social skills. I say, I use gaming. So why gaming? It's low-hanging fruit, honestly. There's a huge number of autistic gamers, and it's something where it's very easy to find that common ground. You start hanging out with autistic kids, just like, hey, what video games are you playing? And they'll tell you, oh, I'm playing Minecraft, I'm playing Roblox, and it becomes a very, very good way to kind of get your foot in the door, kind of get a sense about what they're passionate about. So, with huge numbers of autistic gamers, it can be a very, very easy tool for them to adopt. Um, Gaming is also really helpful in social groups because it creates a social activity with fixed norms, which is very nice for autistic people. Here's this super structured activity where the expectations are very clear to you. Okay, you need to know how these rules, you need to know that your character can do this, you need to be able to do that. It's very prescribed and very activity focused. So that's a major plus to gaming. There's also a huge variety of games out there, and thanks to the internet, you can find community. So, say you're an autistic who has this really niche interest in a video game, well, you can find your people and find people to talk about it with, to play it with. So I think that's a really, really helpful thing. Um, it's also a social activity that can be done from anywhere. A lot of autistic people might not feel too comfortable being in a loud, chaotic environment for their socialization, which unfortunately a lot of social places are really loud and chaotic. So being able to be social without having to leave a place that's comfortable for you, I think is really, really important. And the last part is it's really personal to me. And gaming helped me make friends. It helped me feel less lonely growing up. Before I really found my gaming group, I was lonely. I had no friends, and it was just a really, really bad time. I found artifacts from elementary school that are just horrific. They're like almost suicide notes from a fourth grader. And I look at those and think, oh my God, I was so lonely and so isolated. I didn't feel like I had any friends. And then afterwards, well, I had friends. And I was still kind of miserable because high school, being autistic in middle school and high school was not fun, but I wasn't lonely. So that made a huge difference. So, a bit about my story. There's two pictures on the left and the right. This is my gaming group, and my camera isn't on, but I'm the dude in the white shirt, the Dare shirt on the left, and the Hawaiian shirt on the right. And these are me and the guys. Before I I knew them and started playing games with them. Um, I had no one, and then that guy with the red and the blue shirt, he sat down next to me in detention one day and started talking about the God Emperor of mankind and space marines, and I had no idea what he was talking about. Still don't half the time, but we started playing games together and started playing Dungeons and Dragons, and next thing I knew, I had people to hang with every Saturday night. And we'd hang out at school, we'd play games after school, and suddenly I wasn't lonely. I had people, and D&D gave me a really good opportunity to not only have a social activity where I knew the expectations, because I had to look at the character sheet and say, okay, these are what I can and can't do. And it also gave me this really good sense of community where I was part of a party, I was part of a group, and that was really, really effective and really combating a lot of the feelings of isolation that I had been feeling. And what's cool about these photos is the first one, I think I was 19. We were all 19 when that was taken. A bunch of weird neurodivergent kids. The second photo is I think like 15, 20 years later. I'm still friends with these guys. I hang out with them all the time. We play games. Currently, we're working on Star Trek mostly, but it's really, really just awesome to have that feeling of long-term friendship. And I think a lot of my personal success has been knowing these guys. They've been able to help me. I've been able to help them. We've been really able to support each other. And I don't think I would be nearly as successful without this support network. And I don't know if I'd have my own place. I don't know if I'd have the maturity to be married, which I am. I don't know if I'd be in a place where I had the job skills that I do now. So this gang really saved me, and ultimately it was through us playing Dungeons and Dragons that was the real foundation for my personal success. So, having my personal story really inspired me to start using D&D for good. And how I got into this was kind of an accident. But before I talk about that, I want to talk about what Dungeons and Dragons is. When I say D&D, I mean Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons is a very popular role-playing game that is kind of experiencing a renaissance in the therapeutic world. And what a role-playing game is it's kind of like a shared game of make-believe, where there's someone who's kind of in charge of telling the story, and then a bunch of players who all control one character in the story. And they roll dice to kind of see, okay, do I, kill the monster, or do I, pick the lock, or do I successfully cast a spell? And based on the various dice rolls and whatnot, they either succeed or fail, and that kind of forms a story. And these stories, these campaigns of Dungeons and Dragons, can go on for years. And so right now, the generation that really grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons is now, psychologists and therapists, and they're realizing, hey, this is actually kind of a useful game. We should be using it in our therapeutic practice. So there are a lot of therapists, psychologists, and people in the mental health and adjacent worlds that are using D&D to teach social skills, to explore trauma, to do things as kind of esoteric as promote physical fitness through physical therapy programs. So it's kind of blowing up right now. But my start was in foster care, and I had been just running these games of D&D at my local game store. And I worked in the foster care system back then, and I suddenly see that there's all these foster parents and foster kids come into my games. And yeah, I didn't know that they were foster parents immediately, but afterwards the foster parents would approach me and say, "Hey, I've never seen so and so really light up like that." And he was laughing, he was pounding on the table, he was really getting into it. And he's my foster kid, and his foster sister also has been really struggling. And just to see them playing together, that was amazing. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. So then I talked with the game store owner and asked him, hey, what's the story with all these foster parents? And he says to me, oh yeah, I told you that, or I told everyone that you're running foster care groups. I'm like, you did what now? But it turns out it really worked. It was super successful. So I later met an individual psychologist named Dr. Rafael Bocamazzo, and he was running autism social skills groups up in Bellevue. And he hired me on, and I started working with him running autism groups. And really, the focus with it is utilizing a game that is very accessible to autistics to teach masking. At least the typical social skills model of using D&D really focuses on this masking piece. And when I say masking, I don't mean COVID masking. I mean kind of pretending to have neurotypical traits. Uh, and that can be a very good social skill, but it's not an autistic social skill. It's a social skill that helps you succeed at your job, but not make friends with other autistics. Um, and the nice thing about this game is it makes masking fun, because it's a sandbox. Instead of it being, hey, let's work on, training to do eye contact, or, doing small talk, blah, blah, blah. Suddenly, you're in a game. So you making small talk is you distracting a guard while the rest of the characters go and sneak out the back. Or you making eye contact is, intimidating someone so they spill the beans about, a robbery they witnessed where they're afraid that someone's going to get them or something like that. There's all these opportunities to mask in a very safe, fun, and motivated by playfulness sort of way. Um, and that's a huge part of it. The rewards are built into the game, either through plot or more extrinsic motivators to do teamwork, to have healthy communication. Because, say if they don't do teamwork well, then, trying to break into a bandit base is just going to fall apart because no one's working on the same team and they're going to get thrown out or whatever. So there's a lot of motivation, but it's safe motivation. It's done in a way where there's no real risk. And then there is a lot of perspective taking. There's a lot of points where you can ask, what would your character do? Is this what you would do or your character do? So there's really just a lot of cool, kind of standard neurotypical social skills that are really baked into it. So I was running these groups, and they were going really, really well. And then COVID happened, and I found out that, hey, we can no longer do in-person groups. Do we want to try to do Zoom, or is there another option? And so one of the kids said, hey, let's use Discord. And for those of you who don't know, Discord is a chat application that's really popular with a lot of gamers. It is very easy to use, it's very gaming centric, and we were able to put in a lot of tools in there that made D&D very easy to play with Discord. And what I like about them choosing Discord was this was a social tool or a social app that they were already comfortable with. It's very native to their own neurodiversity. And I was very lucky to have an autistic co-facilitator who was willing to kind of keep an eye on the Discord server as well as me. Now, a note on my autistic co-facilitator for one of my groups. She was a former student in the group who was very, very shy and really came out of her shell, had been diagnosed with autism for a very young age, and she has been a wonderful asset for kind of helping me kind of, I guess, check my privilege, so to say, and realize when I'm kind of being a bit too neurotypical and not centering autism enough. So she has been a real asset in helping me kind of rethink how I respect autism and how I embrace autism. Um, but yeah, she was really, really good in helping keep an eye on the Discord server and help facilitate autistic communication outside the groups. So for example, sometimes kids will be talking during the week and I'll check on the Discord server and there'll be like 6 pages of chat messages about, their character using a specific spell and how that would work. And can I use the spell if it's raining? Can I use the spell if it's snowing? Blah, blah, blah. And them just really getting into stuff. I think that is a really, really cool space for autistic people because it's a lot less social pressure and they can kind of focus on the ideas. It also uses these things called channels, which are small kind of compartments based on the subject of the conversation. So there is a random channel where the kids can just kind of talk about whatever. There is a sharing channel where the kids share, the art they're doing or, a piece of music they're working on. There is a character building channel where the kids can work on building their characters and helping each other with that. So it's one of those nice things where the kids know the topic of the conversation. I think that's really, really helpful. And there's also some really good gaming functionality built in where the kids can stream stuff to each other. So I'll find out that the kids have been staying up till midnight streaming games with each other. And I'll hear from the parents like, he stayed up till midnight talking with a friend. On one side, he's staying up till midnight, and I'm doing that on a school night. But on the other side, he's never had a friend to stay up to midnight with. So, mixed blessing. And also, the kids will just have a space where they can info dump at their leisure. And sometimes it'll take several hours for another kid to respond, or even days. But they have that space where they can info dump safely, and there's no real stigma about it. So as this kept on going, the kids started sharing stories from their lives and helping each other advocate. Um, I remember this one time a kid came on, and yeah, I wasn't keeping an eye on the server at this point. My co-facilitator was. A kid came on and said, "Hey, a teacher just harassed me for being autistic," and it was like watching someone kick a wasp nest. Suddenly, all the kids were coming out of the woodwork to say, "Okay, here's what you do. Here's how you get your parents involved. If the school isn't doing this, here's how to do this." and here's how to sue the school. It was this amazing, beautiful example of advocacy and self-advocacy, and that's something I love to see. And also, there's some, intersectional advocacy there. In the span of a week, 4 kids in one of the groups came out as some type of queer, and the response was, "Oh, cool, that's awesome." Just super responsive, super chill, and I'm that way myself, and being able to just normalize that and just have a really cool, healthy, chill vibe made it very clear that this was a safe space. So that was a really cool kind of intersectional piece. I also saw them writing social manuals for each other, which was so sweet. I had one kid that was expressing a lot of frustration because I wouldn't just give him things. He would say, "Oh, I want a sword that can cut for anything." And I would say, "Well, a sword like that exists in the world, but you gotta find it. You gotta work for it." And he was getting really frustrated. And every week he'd have some new request of something he wanted. And finally, one of the kids said, "Look, Peter wants to tell a story. He wants you to be part of the story. If you want this thing, here's some ways to incorporate that into your character. You should talk to Peter about why you want this, and he'll make it happen." And it did. It took a while, but he said, "I really want my character to have this." And after a while, his character earned it, and he was so happy about that. Another thing that I saw um, was something that I call beautiful autism, and it's like the writing manuals for each other. I see so many trauma narratives around autism, usually coming from parent groups or these various quote unquote advocacy groups that really paint a picture of autism that is very negative and inspires a lot of guilt for autistic people. What I saw in these groups was autism creating these beautiful, kind of nerdy but awesome social moments that were honestly just the coolest thing. So I call that beautiful autism. And one really good example is them bonding over their autistic experiences in the game. So this one time in the game, there was this character called the Stabber, and of course he was obsessed with knives, and he was arranging his knives in a line. And one of the characters created an illusion to make him think that there were extra knives for him to sort into the line, and then the illusion kind of dissipated, and the whole line was messed up. All the knives were no longer in a perfectly equidistant order. And all the kids were like, "Oh no, we messed up his line. Oh, that's the worst thing." And they were laughing and saying how guilty they felt and showing a lot of empathy over this. And I was just so happy with that moment because that was a moment where something that is really pathologized and really kind of seen as a negative in their lives was suddenly something that they're laughing over. And so that was a really good example of beautiful autism. And then, I saw kids becoming friends on their own terms. And I think, is really if you build it, they will come sort of thing. But suddenly kids are going to each other's birthday parties, they're hanging out online, they're hanging out in person, they're, staying up late. They are becoming really good friends and expressing that. They're um, actually telling me that they're happy because of this group. And, I think a really big part of that was that there was a change in how screen time was seen. Prior to COVID, there was a lot of demonization around screen time. But suddenly, as soon as screen time is school, people aren't really talking about that as much. So I think being able to normalize gaming online, that was really critical. And again, I got a lot of self-reports from kids that before this group, they were lonely. And now they don't feel that way. They feel like they have friends, and it is like such a good thing for them. And it really, really is an important thing to acknowledge that having friendships and growing up lonely is incredibly important for healthy development. The suicidality rate of autistic people is significantly higher than neurotypical people. And I think by having opportunities for them to develop healthy friendships, you can reduce those feelings of anxiety and isolation and have people that they can reach out to when they're feeling alone and scared. So, question: how do autistic friendships form? Uh, they don't look like neurotypical friendships. And I always say they're built different. They have their own needs, they have their own functions. The hangout time looks different. They're their own thing. A big thing is dropping the expectation of masking, because that is going to make the friendship exhausting. If you're masking to be in a social situation, you're going to be tired hanging out with people. And for people who are already pretty introverted, that's just a double whammy. So you're just going to think that socialization is just something that is incredibly exhausting for you. So removing that masking expectation really helps. Another thing is to acknowledge that there's not a lot of role models for autistic friendships in the media. And most social activities prior to COVID were really designed with neurotypical kids in mind. Look at sports meets and prom and parties and all these things that are really loud and really chaotic. There's not a lot of structure. It's not a good time. Um, so it really helps just to create a space for it, where there are those kind of very concrete expectations. The autism is centered, there's no expectation of masking, and these friendships will start forming organically. Um, you also model autistic socialization. And what I mean by that is uh, really being able to, show what it looks like. And I think a really key part of that is having autistic people running these things that can info dump, that can talk about their boundaries, that can relate to each other on those autistic wavelengths. So modeling that, I think, is really, really critical. And then, as that goes on, you start seeing the kids advocating for each other. A lot of autistic people are very, very invested in justice. They're very sensitive to injustice, and I think that that results in some really amazing opportunities for advocacy and being able to help each other out. And then, pay special attention to learning how to navigate each other's neurodiversity and work through incompatibilities. And a real obvious case of this is, the kid that is really noise sensitive, and then the kid that gets really loud when he's excited and, might start, pounding the table. Being able to have a conversation about that and acknowledge that, hey, we're both wanting to be here. This is a space where we're both allowed to be. How can we make this work? Is this something where we can sit in different parts of the table? Or can, if you need to stim loudly, you just step out. Or if it's getting too loud, you can step out. Finding a way to come to a solution that works for both parties, I think, is another really critical piece. So next up, um, let's talk about how to facilitate autistic social skills. So once you have that space where autistic friendships are forming, let's talk about, helping make those skills happen. So right off the bat, acknowledge that most social skills groups and things are really focusing on neurotypical social skills, not autistic social skills. And this is not to say that neurotypical social skills don't matter. No, they matter. It's really important to be able to mask well. That's sad. Yeah, I wish things were different, but this is the way the world is. Being able to hold a job down often means having to mask a fair amount. Um, it sucks, but it is what it is. But that's not autistic social skills. So think about autistic social skills as a separate thing that is just as important. And really, a lot of it requires just dropping a lot of the neurotypical socialization norms. No longer requiring eye contact. No longer saying things like no cell phones. That can be a really good way to become a bit more steady if you're feeling a little dysregulated. Just checking some apps, playing a little game. So just realizing that the neurotypical socialization norms no longer apply. Um, it's really important to be inclusive, welcoming, and open. Talk about your own experiences, be welcoming, and make a culture where that is really, really central. Um, and then, if you're autistic, and, again, it's really important to hire autistics, self-disclosure can be really helpful. Um, and isn't always, there's some kids that have a lot of trauma about their diagnosis and might not want to talk about that, and that's fine. But it can be a very powerful tool for kind of helping kids navigate their own experiences. Another really good way is to share autistic-focused media. And that's not what you think. It's not like, As We See It or, various shows that portray autism. Usually it's more like, hey, this thing's your special interest. Here's a remix of the song from it. And kind of being able to really share those things that are you kind of saying, "Hey, I'm reminded of you. Here's this thing that's up your alley that's super kind of esoteric, and you're gonna love it." And then, celebrate the autistic experience in a celebratory way. And then the last and I think most critical piece here is to hire autistics. And I cannot stress this enough. We are very much underemployed, and this is a really good way for us to find good employment and also give us a space at the table. I'm a big fan of the term, nothing about us without us, and this is a good way to bring us in and also let the kids see autistics in a position of authority. I think that's super critical. Oh, I was just talking about that. So yeah, nothing about us without us, but also a really good thing about having autistics on your staff is they will pick up things that you cannot. I worked at a wraparound agency for a while, and when we'd be doing team meetings, I would regularly notice things and see, an autistic kid trying to say something. And none of my neurotypical colleagues would see it. And finally, I would just stop the meeting and say, okay, we need to talk about this because they have been trying to say something and no one is picking up on this. Please share what you said earlier because that's really important. And so having those autistic peer counselors, facilitators is key. Um, it's also really powerful for modeling advocacy just because as an autistic adult, you have to be good at advocacy to survive, and they can really teach a lot of things. And I think autistics belong as leaders in the fields of autism services. I think that the peer counseling model is really, really good because that takes away a lot of the uh, requirements of grad school in these fields. And I'm lucky enough to be pretty academically talented, but I know a lot of autistics that really struggle in academic environments. So I think by focusing on peer counseling, you can level that playing field and bring more autistics into it. Um, and yeah, again, finally, it's really heartening to see autistics in positions of power and leading these groups because that says to the youth in these groups that, hey, there's hope for me. There's so much media out there and tragedy narratives that say, oh, your autistic kid's just going to be on the couch forever. They're never going to be able to get a job. But then they go to one of these groups and see that, hey, the facilitator's autistic. Maybe I could get a job as a facilitator. And that is a really important message of hope. And finally, it's really important to remember that you should focus on both. Um, there's a place for both, but probably don't want to mix them. The space for autistic social skills is really, really important for that to be a safe space. And then the space for neurotypical social skills, you can still use Dungeons and Dragons and things like that, but it's going to be a different environment. So it's really important to have that kind of separation. At least I feel. Other people might think that, oh, you can do both, but I think when you're creating an autistic-centered space, creating it as a space that is ultimately very safe to be autistic is critical. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do some neurotypical social skills development through role playing and things like that, but that should be seen as kind of an afterthought. Um, then, yeah, ultimately the big goal of these groups is to help them with advocacy, help them become self-advocates, help them really learn how to support each other, because in the end, it is critical to grow up with the ability to self-advocate when you need it, because that is one of the most important life skills that autistic people need. So that is pretty much it. I'm gonna go pause this, and afterwards you can run some questions, but real quick wanted to share my contact information. So you can reach me at peterj2@uw.edu. Also, I run a website where I talk about using games for good. It's called rollforkindness.com. You can also find me on Twitter at rollforkindness. So I usually am talking about a lot of autism advocacy stuff and using games for good, but I would love to hear any feedback you have, and I'm looking forward to answering some questions. So thank you so much.